Good morning and welcome to another episode of Shimano Facebook Live. I'm your host, Andrew Juiliano, and today we've got a great topic for you about a great organization. In 2009, the National Interscholastic Cycling Association started with the mission to get more kids on bikes. Today, there's over 31 leagues and 22,000 student athletes across the country in NICA's programs. Of course, in the time of COVID-19, there are some adaptations and changes that have had to take place with NICA's programs. But here today is the organization's president to tell us about how NICA is not only getting more kids on bikes, but keeping them on bikes safely. Please welcome Steve Matous.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. So I guess my first question is when I think of NICA, I think of these big groups of kids, these huge weekend gatherings, this great kind of festival-like atmosphere that's really come to define sort of what I think of when I think of NICA. That's obviously going to look a little different this fall. What is a NICA event going to look like during COVID-19?
You know, it's interesting with what you just said, because that truly is the defining picture that the public has of NICA, is these thousands of people, family members, adults, siblings, coaches, student athletes, everybody together for an entire weekend, having campfires, parties, racing, training, swapping stories. It's very much a huge community event. But given the current realities of COVID-19, that's not going to happen. That's just not possible. But at the same time, what's interesting is that NICA, the majority of what we do with the student athletes happens at a team level, happens with coaches. Those weekend events are the culmination of many months of work and years of time together. But in fact, you know, the weekend racing events are only happening 5 or 6 times a year for a particular student athlete and their team. Really, most of the time they're spending is in those smaller groups. Some teams can be pretty large. You know, there are teams that have 100 kids on them. But for the most part, we're talking about smaller groups and activities, whether they're training, whether they're doing what we call adventure, which is think more of experiential education. There's specific goals, there's facilitation that happens. The idea is to create tenacity, encourage self-confidence, self-reliance, teamwork. So all that stuff's going on in the background, and it's happening all the time, and it will continue to happen. Another program we have, for example, is called Teen Trail Corps. And we work very closely with IMBA and many local trail organizations to help maintain and build trails around the country. Our student athletes volunteer tens of thousands of hours. It's amazing how much time they spend maintaining trails, but they also advocate for them. They go to city council meetings, they go to county commissioner offices. And so all this is happening right now. It's still happening. It hasn't stopped. In terms of our race weekends and our race events, we are going to be able to do some of those, but in a very different format. And of course, it depends where. We operate in 30 states, and in every one of those states, the local public health departments have different rules. So even as an example, within the state of Colorado, where I am right now, what's happening in Boulder County isn't necessarily what you're allowed to do in Jefferson County. So there's all kinds of back and forth and unknowns. What we've decided to do for those leagues that are going to try and hold race events this fall is to do a time trial format. So instead of racing against a whole group in a mass start, kids will go off one at a time. They'll be appropriately distanced, probably a minute of spacing so that there's no chance of overcatching. We're going to have the teams show up at a specified time, and only that team, which has been operating together in a bubble in a small group anyway, will be on the course at any given time, and then they'll leave when they're done. But our staff, our course staff, our volunteers, our full-time paid employees will have the course set up, course marshals will be there, all the safety stuff will be in place, first aid, everything as we would normally have with a regular race weekend event, but there'll be no spectators. There'll be no mass gatherings. And while that sounds odd and harsh, it's really the only way we can move forward to have an event that involves the entire league on a weekend. And we'll see how it goes. We are, in August, we're still what we call preseason. Racing will start here within a month's time. Utah, Minnesota, Georgia, Arizona, a number of our fall leagues will do these individual time trial events that I've been talking about. But again, remember, we're engaging our students 2 or 3 times a week at a team level. They're doing these adventure rides, they're doing training, they're gathering together in these small groups and pods. And again, we're following whatever the public health regulations are. So in Maryland, for example, which is it's a fall league, they're told they cannot have a group of more than 10. So basically that means 2 coaches and 8 student athletes, but it works fine.
Gotcha. So so basically, I was seeing that Utah is actually supposed to start this weekend. Is that
Oh, okay.
so? So they're
It's later than I remember.
yeah. That's right. I just took a peek at the calendar before we started
Yeah,
and read their press release. So basically, they're still going to be racing, but it's going to be in this sort of more separated format and more isolated
correct.
format.
Yeah, so in Utah, for example, they're one of the states that has the largest gathering size allowed. I believe they can have up to 1,000 people at an outdoor event, and we're not just talking about cycling. It's just the state regulations. But again, Utah, like the other leagues that I described earlier, will do the time trial format. They'll have set times when a team shows up. The team will be the only group on course at the given time. When they finish their individual time trial, the times are recorded, a leaderboard's created, so people who want to have that active engagement of competition will still have it, but again, it'll be as an individual. When they're done racing, the team will leave, next team will show up, and this will go on all day. Utah is our largest league. They have over close to 5,000 student athletes. So for them to run a race event is a very long and involved process. Often we'll do 2 different events on the same weekend at different locations just to accommodate the numbers we have.
Wow. And so basically, kind of the way it's all structured is NICA, the national organization, kind of creates this new guideline for like, hey, if we're going to race, we're going to do it this way. And then the leagues adopt that. Is that like you guys?
No, it's more of a give and take. So the national organization ultimately, when we first launched into this COVID new reality, we told all of our leagues and teams that no practices were allowed because we didn't know what was going to happen. We just were following the guidelines, just like everyone across the country. There's these huge unknowns, and we took a very conservative approach. We work with student athletes that are 12 to 18 years old, so they're all minors, and we really have to make sure that their safety is foremost in our mind. So we took a very conservative approach. But as the months evolved and things changed, and public health departments came out with different rules and guidelines, and people learned more about the virus, and we understood how it was transmitted and what the risk factors were, we were then able to work with the individual leagues and say, okay, here's the bottom line. Here's the foundational things you have to do: socially distant, mask wearing, hand sanitizer, no sharing of water bottles, no sharing of food, no group size larger than X. Once we put those baselines in place, then the individual leagues took a look at their local situations. They worked with their coaches and their teams. They worked with their public health departments, the venues where we hold these races, and they took a very close look at what the local officials would allow and what comfort levels their parents, their student athletes, their coaches had. Because again, that varies significantly across the country. We have teams in New Jersey, we have teams in California, and everywhere in between. And local conditions are not the same. So we, as a national organization, said, okay, here's the bottom, foundational guidelines. So long as you pay attention to these, then you tell us what works best for you locally. So it's a real give and take, but the local leagues very much are the ones making the final call. The only reason they wouldn't be is if there was some national edict that, again, the whole country got shut down like it did early on, and then the national organization would step in. But that's not where we're at right now.
Has NICA always kind of functioned that way, where nationally you provide guidelines and then a lot of the operations and sort of the way it's shaped happens on a more local level in terms
Absolutely.
of yeah.
Absolutely. It's all local is where everything happens. It's the coach with the student athletes in a team and the league with the teams. We, as a national organization, really think of us as the brand representative, the advocate, the face, the legal foundation, the support, the guidance. But everything happens locally. Without the 11,000 volunteers that we have across the country, Most of those are coaches. Many of them are also volunteers that help operate the weekend events and the other things that go on. There are course marshals, there are safety people. Without all those people, none of this happens, and that's all local. But in terms of, we set standards. So for an example, to be a coach, it's a national program. They're licensed by NICA as a national organization. They're required trainings, background checks, safety, first aid. There's all sorts of standards. And then each of the leagues implement that locally.
Gotcha. Very cool. And so how is it, I see that there are sometimes teams from high schools, and then there's these things called composite teams. I mean, how does that work?
When we were first created as an organization in 2009, we were developed out of the what's now called the NorCal League. So initially there was this one organization in Northern California, started in Berkeley High. And the initial thought was we would be school-based, and again, initially high school only. Now we have middle school as well. So the interscholastic, that's what that refers to, is that school-based organization. And so the evolution of any organization, you adapt to the times and to who your constituents are. And what we've realized over time is that not every school is either interested or willing to have a mountain bike team or club, and not every school is able. So in order to accommodate the interest of the student athletes and the coaches across the country, we started creating composite teams. And composite teams means that the kids come from more than one school, and that they all race on the same team. And they, over time, if the number of kids on a composite team grows to a point where they have sufficient numbers to be school-based, our rule book, our handbook addresses that and says, okay, now you've got to operate out of school X instead of composite Y. But for the most part, we don't want to discourage anyone. The composite rules allow us to create teams in places where they wouldn't other exist.
Gotcha. So pretty much if there's any kid anywhere, they have a way to get involved, even if their school doesn't have a
Absolutely. Program. And we strongly encourage that. It's interesting with the recent issues around Black Lives Matter. That's something that has been part of our DNA for a number of years. We have a lot of outreach in urban areas. We have a very small number comparatively to the U.S. population, but significant compared to cycling as a whole, people of color involved. And one of the things that we found early on is that you can discourage and create barriers by forcing people to be school-based. So composite teams, and even now we're taking a look at our composite rules to make sure that we don't create barriers. It's interesting that it's come up more around both rural and urban, not necessarily suburban. But if you think of, as an example, in Georgia, the rural areas of southern Georgia, often there's lots of composite teams involved in the league, just because they don't have the volume of people to create a school-based league. And so we're looking at this all the time. We're definitely an organization, while we're rule-based, as any competitive organization has to be, we also think very intentionally about, well, what do these rules do to the kids, and how does it affect them? Is it positive in terms of character development? Fine. Is it negative in terms of encouraging participation? Then let's change it or get rid of it. So we're always taking a look at this stuff. We have to go back to your earlier question. So the national body has a structure for these rules, and we have what's called a rules committee. But in fact, that is made up of the league directors from all 31 leagues. They're the ones that vote. They're the ones that decide. And so we cede control, or that's probably not the right way to put it, but we basically allow our organization as a whole to discuss what works best at the local level for us as an organization. And again, as we said earlier, we may have some bottom line things like everybody has to wear a helmet, right? Mm-hmm. You can't change that rule.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting what you were saying, though, about how, your policy can make the sport and the league more accessible to people. Something as simple as making it so that you have a composite team versus, and it's something that maybe on the surface doesn't seem like a big deal, but do you know how many kids are involved through composite teams, or what percentage of the?
I don't. I haven't looked at that number, but I know it's significant enough that it's always discussion in all our leagues. And it's a discussion right now, as I mentioned, just because we're looking at it again to make sure that we're not creating any sort of artificial barriers that would prevent people, especially in urban areas, to join and participate. Because schools, it depends where you are. School districts are run differently. There are charter schools in some places, there aren't in others. School funding is usually based on tax revenues off of property. And so if you live in Beverly Hills, you're going to have a very different look and feel at your high school than if you live in some poor urban area in one of the Midwest cities. I mean, that's just the reality.
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, speaking to economic accessibility, does NICA have any programs, say you can get on a team, but then the equipment is also another factor? I mean, is there a way to overcome that barrier for people if maybe they want to get involved in cycling, but they don't have the means or the access to a bike?
Yes, both nationally and locally. Again, as I keep reminding myself, everything happens locally. Every one of our leagues has relationships with sponsors that allow them to provide fleets of bikes that are what we call loaners, and also provide scholarships. We also do this at a national level because we have great relationships with Shimano and other incredible sponsors that allow us to fund fleets of bikes, allow us to help provide direct compensation, not a significant amount of money, but enough at times to help make the difference for whether or not somebody can participate. Mm-hmm. And at the league level, their scholarship programs, generally they have often they'll do an essay or they'll do some way to have the student athletes make the ask so that they have buy-in. It's not just I don't know what the right way to put it is. It's not just a giveaway. Mm-hmm. The student athlete has to show interest and put up their own skin as well. Not that they have to put up money or anything if they don't have it, but we want to make sure the student athlete really wants to do this and isn't just doing it because somebody's going to hand them a free bike.
Yeah. I just think back to growing up. I know that, I used to work in a restaurant washing dishes so that I could buy bike parts. And
right.
It wasn't, it took a while to get them, but once you get them, I mean, you just have such pride in what you've worked for, and whether that's, actually going out and working a job or whether it's contributing in some way to a program. I think there's definitely a value
exactly.
in that.
And again, we have partners in the cycling world that will take on student athletes, just as you said, to work in a bike shop as an opportunity, both to learn and grow. It's as you know, for anyone in their teenage years to have a job, it's really empowering in terms of your self-confidence and your self-reliance and learning about the everyday work world and the issues that we're all going to face as we grow up. And so it's wonderful.
And I mean, this is kind of going back towards the beginning of our conversation when we were talking about how racing is kind of the high profile thing that people think of, but there's so much more to the NICA programs, and there's so much more of the time is spent not racing. And you were mentioning
Absolutely.
Trail work. I mean, do you guys have any kind of, I guess it would almost be kind of like vocational training for bike mechanic programs or things like that then a kid could go out and get a job at a shop and say, hey, I have these skills.
We have a couple of things that have gone on at a national level. We work with Project Bike Tech, and they work directly with the leagues. Project Bike Tech is another nonprofit that specifically focuses on training youth in bike mechanic skills, and they work in schools, so it really ties well in with NICA. We also have a program with Trek, one of our corporate partners, where they will run. They can't do it this summer, but last summer they had 50 kids come to the Trek headquarters and work in the shop for a week time to learn skills. So we're always looking at this. And then at the local level with in the leagues, there's many relationships with local bike dealers, independent bike dealers, very, very important constituency for us as an organization. Those people are the ones that sponsor teams, support the student athletes. Of course, they get our business as well to maintain and take care of the bikes that the families own. And what you also see, we have this interesting relationship in that, and we track this, so we know for a fact that for every student athlete we have 2.5 other people from their family or immediate um, group that participates in the league. Either they support the student athlete as being a coach, or they come to the events, or anyway. So we've got this population that's much more than just a student athlete. And so the cycling industry, especially bike shops locally, they see that. They don't just get the student's bike, they get the parent's bike, they get the sibling's bike. There's a great symbiotic relationship there. So we're supporting them, they're supporting us, and it works really well. There's a lot of advocacy that goes on out of local bike shops, as you know, especially with regards to trail work. So there's another overlap for us there. As I mentioned earlier, we work with local trail organizations. Doesn't matter where it is, in New Jersey or Michigan or wherever we're operating. I shouldn't have said Michigan because we're not there, but Wisconsin, Minnesota, et cetera. The reason I was thinking about Michigan is because there's a league there that we've had some discussion with as to whether they might join NICA, the NICA family.
Huh. So I guess, yeah, if there's 31 leagues and there's 50 states, then we still have a
little bit of growth.
Yeah, some growth potential.
Yeah.
Is that
the way we?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry to cut you off, Andrew. I was just going to say real quick while I'm thinking of it, we, at the current levels, with the current leagues that operate and the teams where they exist, we have exposure to over 70% of the people in America. So even though there's 19 states we're not in yet, Alaska, Hawaii are two of them, I'm volunteering to go start the new league in Hawaii.
Yeah, I bet that list is pretty long for people who are on board for that one.
But and actually, there's a lot of mountain biking in Hawaii, a lot of cycling in general.
Yeah.
But all I wanted to say is, even with our footprint as it is currently, we are accessible to the majority of people in America. We're not stopping. We intend to be in all 50 states. We intend to more than tenfold increase the number of student athletes participating in the next 10 years. We'll see what COVID does to us. But while I'm thinking of it, so we track stats through our registration program. We know how many coaches sign up, how many student athletes sign up. And at the end of July, so just a few weeks ago, we had 15% more students registered than we did same time frame, end of July 2019. And that's with COVID.
Wow.
So we're still growing.
That's great. So do you think it's, kids seeing their friends doing it and wanting to get involved, or just the general growth of cycling in general? Or what do you think is continuing to draw kids to the NICA programs, even though there's this last season in the spring, there was no racing going on. So what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I went to 3 weekend events before COVID shut us down in February, early March. But I think it's really the same reaction we're seeing around the entire country and the entire globe, where people have never ridden a bike are now riding them because things are shut down. And people are tired of sitting inside, being cooped up. They need to get out. But most traditional sports, contact sports, of course, are completely out the window right now. But mountain biking is outside. You can stay socially distanced. You get just an incredible bit of energy from the fact that you are disengaged from the screen and away from whatever is troubling you. I just think a lot of people are seeing it as a bit of relief. And certainly for kids 12 to 18 years old, wow, they need to get some of that energy out. There's a huge, huge demand to get outside and active, to be involved with your fellow friends and athletes if you can, just to get away from the daily grind and routine. Many of the schools that are starting up this fall, are virtual only. So all of us, I think it's very, very common for all of us at any age to crave that interaction with other people. And mountain biking, you can do that in a safe way. You can wear a mask, you can stay distant, you don't have to touch one another, you can have your own food, your own supplies, but you can still be out with a group. One of the things I saw just recently, one of our coach licensing staff shared, he was practicing with a team the other day in a big open field, and they were playing soccer on mountain bikes. Every kid had a mask on, and it's this wide open field, plenty of ventilation, obviously, plenty of wind to disperse people's breath. It was wonderful. And I think that's really what's driving it. Now, NICA has always had this huge double-digit growth year over year since it started. But the fact that we're not seeing a decline says to me that we're needed more than ever. Students and coaches, emotional, physical health is just, everybody needs an outlet.
Hmm. Is there any kind of, I mean, I know that a lot of us who are cyclists, turn to the bike as a way to relieve stress and anxiety and things like that. I mean, is there any kind of specific program or numbers that NICA has? I know that there's a big push um, to raise awareness about mental health, and I mean, especially as a teenager, I mean that's one of the toughest times in anyone's life, whether they're in middle school or high school. I mean, is there any kind of program or data that you guys have in regards to that?
We don't have specific data because we don't track that. There are some other organizations that do. The Outright Foundation, as an example, works with people who have ADD and other specific issues. But what we found anecdotally is a huge difference in students that participate in our programs, students that have had trouble in school, emotional issues, things going on at home that aren't quite right. We definitely anecdotally see a difference. But we also work very closely with Lou Burkholtz on our character development curriculum and facilitation skills. And so we've tried to enhance the skill sets and the trainings that our coaches have, not necessarily to identify, because we're not psychiatrists, we're not therapists, and I don't ever mean to imply that, but just to identify how to work with students who are struggling a little bit and maybe have some additional issues that they're facing at home or elsewhere. And what, again, anecdotally, what we're finding is that these people shine, and it makes a huge difference for them. One of our core values is nobody's on the bench. Everybody participates, and it doesn't matter if you race or not. I think the last time I looked at our stats, it was roughly 85% of our total student-athlete body races, but that means there's 15%, so there's thousands of kids that don't race. But they still participate, they still enjoy it because it's meaningful. It addresses the issues that you already discussed: stress, anxiety, just the acceptance. As a kid, we all want to be accepted. We want to be part of something. And so all that's one of the things that I love. And it's unfortunate, the weekend events, you could really see this. When I would go to race events and watch at the start-finish line as kids would come through, I would see groups of kids from other teams cheering them on. I would see their own team waiting for the last kid to finish. I would see parents and coaches and people, spectators, just lined up until every last person came through. It was not like, oh, Johnny's done, let's go home. That's just not how those things happen at NICA. And it's such a wonderful community feel. So again, I think you put all those factors together, and people see an opportunity, they see an outlet. If we're allowed to do our individual time trials, if we're allowed to have our team practices, the kids are going to be there because they need it.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about that kind of. There's different teams, but it's not like this kind of animosity that you get with regular sports. I mean, I'm just thinking back to my days playing soccer and some of the things that I heard on the high school and the college field from like parents or other fans.
Yeah.
And I've never experienced that in cycling, and I've ridden and raced for over 20 years, and it's great that these big NICA events, they sort of filter out all that negativity, it sounds like. I mean, I'm sure there's people who have rough times here and there, but it sounds overwhelmingly positive.
Whenever you have tens of thousands of people, in an organization, of course there'll be some negativity and there'll be a little bit of what you're talking about, but the lack of it is so profound and so obvious when any one of our events or team practices or anything that we're doing. It's really uplifting, I guess is the right word. I know for me, it's what keeps me going. As the president of this organization, I have to deal with anything and everything you can imagine that any organization that has tens of thousands of people involved would have to deal with. So there's a lot of, business and negative things as well. But what keeps me so committed and so passionate is when I get out there and see the student athletes and how they work with one another. Or as an example, I'll go out and pre-ride the course with a group of kids, and we'll have fun racing each other. But it's very interesting, like if you come out of a field and you're about to go into the woods, I can remember a specific instance, what we call the race leader. So there's a leader's jersey that kids can earn in their category by scoring points, winning races, whatever. And the 17-year-old race leader was right next to me as we were about to go into the woods, and he braked, and he said, "You go first." Where else does that happen?
Yeah.
Doesn't happen.
No. Well, that's interesting. I mean, do you have, I mean, that's kind of one instance, but do you have any one, or is there any story or anecdote, or maybe somebody sent you an email, something that sticks out in your mind that keeps you inspired?
Almost every week, I was not every day because I get involved in too many other things. I just recently heard from one of our student athletes about a month ago who is a senior this year, and so lost his season, lost his school year, lost, all that camaraderie and encouragement from his peers that you would normally have in your senior year of high school. And he wrote me and said, "Steve, I'm going to college. I'm going to be self-paying, and I'm trying to figure out how to do that. I invented this item called a Choo-Tube, and actually I've got one here. I might just hold it up."
There you go. Yeah. A Choo-Tube.
So I don't know if you can see this. Let me see if I got one that's colored. What the kids often do is they will take their Cliff Bars or their other items and they'll stick them on the top of the bars, because in a mountain bike race, often you can't let go of the handlebars as you're riding, except for a brief moment.
Mm-hmm.
And to stay well fed, what they'll do is they'll literally take who's ever, whether it's goo, Cliff Bar, whoever, whatever the food item they have, and they'll stick it on their handlebar. So what this guy did was he invented, this is really teeny. I don't know if you can see how small this is. This is only maybe a quarter of an inch high.
Mm-hmm.
What it does is it straps on your handlebar and you stick whatever food item on here, so you can literally just grab it and pop it into your mouth as you're riding. And I was like, wow, how inventive, and he created a website and he's selling them to his fellow student athletes. And so we gave him a shout out in the in our NICA newsletter, just because I thought, this is amazing. This kid is, and the reason he's doing this is not just to help his fellow student athletes and with something that he knows people need. He's hoping it'll help pay for college. I was like, wow, this is incredible. Another student athlete also recently created a new website that identifies drinking fountains all around the country, and it's it's one of these classic things that's powered by the people that use it. So the more people that use it, the more it grows, more locations get named. And again, his thought was that, hey, when I'm out riding my bike around town, I'm going to run out of water. Where can I get water? Where is water publicly available? And again, just the creativity of the student athletes and the solutions that they're trying to come up with for problems that they're seeing, It's phenomenal. It's really great.
Well, that's cool too, because it's problems that they see with something they're really passionate about with cycling. And I feel like whenever you have an idea and you combine it with something you love, then you put all this time and effort into it, and that's really cool. I mean, is that something? Are there any kind of programs, or do you guys encourage that, or is that just kind of it pops up?
No, it's completely encouraged. That's part of the what we say NICA is a youth development organization. Racing is our venue. That's what we do. That's how we pull out characteristics through training, through practice. But no, our core values of inclusivity, of fun, of diversity, trying to develop skills like self-confidence, self-reliance, teamwork, community. I mean, that's all part of being on the bike. And as a multi-decade veteran and racer, the skill sets that you develop. And when you have a little bit of facilitation from a coach, then you develop it even more strongly, and it happens. So yes, we very much work with kids on that. It varies, of course. Not every coach is the same. Not every coach has the same level of training or interest, but certainly it's part of our overall DNA. And just to go back to a comment you made a minute ago, I learned something very on in my tenure when I was much younger. I worked for a man who, interesting enough, when he started the company that he started, he never had any thought at all that he would become a significant player in the marketplace. He was just starting his company out of passion. And I remember he said to me as a young 20-something when I was working for him as a sales rep, he said, Steve, don't ever worry about money. Think about what's your passion. Follow your passion. If you follow your passion, you're going to be successful. You'll earn whatever money it is you want to earn. You'll do well. If you chase money, if you chase things, status, if you chase things that are not part of your passion, it's probably not going to go well. And he was definitely right. That man is Yvon Chouinard, who owns Patagonia.
Yeah, he's done all right. He's done a couple things.
I learned a good lesson from him.
Yeah. That's interesting too. I mean, because I think that mentors are really, I think they're very important, and I don't know if they're easy enough to access. At least for me, it's something that, you know, you hear people talk about their mentor. They had this person they learned something valuable from. And I know personally, like, you really have to work hard to find a mentor. And is that something that's built into NICA, that you try and facilitate that and try and give kids access to somebody who can make a difference in the way they see the world or think?
I think that's what our coaches do. You know, again, there's varying degrees of expertise and talent, but those 11,000 volunteer coaches are mentors to these kids. And some of them make huge impacts that maybe the kids don't even realize right now, and they'll figure out years later. Just like my mention of working with Yvon decades ago. At the time, I don't really think I thought of that as mentoring. And I feel very lucky now and realize now that that was a significant mentoring relationship. And so I think often when you're in these organizations like NICA, where you do have leadership, and you do have coaches in our case, that are, what's the right way to put it? They are living and showing and breathing and emulating the values that the kids aspire to, even if there's not a lot of facilitated discussions. You know, teenagers aren't going to spend a lot of time talking about their feelings, right? But they do watch, they do observe, they do listen. And I find it very interesting, again, when I've been at weekend events, interacting with the student athletes, how mature and how well-spoken they are when they want to be. And yeah, they're cut-ups and they're crazy and they're doing all sorts of nutty stuff,
Kid
right?
stuff,
Because
yeah.
they're kids. But what I find is that they learn a lot by participating, and even if it's not a quote-unquote mentor, there's mentorship happening for sure.
Yeah, it's funny. You think back to when you're a kid or your early 20s, and yeah, you never, like, mentorship never has that, like, here, sit down and I'm going to tell you how it is, because that never
No.
works. Like, you never listen. But I have these little nuggets that pop into my head that, like, my soccer coach when I was 16 told me, or that the chef that I worked for when I was in college or in high school
Yeah.
told me. And then you sit back and reflect on it and you go, oh yeah, that was pretty wise.
And the good news is we often, not just at NICA, but other organizations I've been involved in over the past, I also had the great fortune to work for Outward Bound for a number of years. And recently, 2012, 2016, I was the director for the entire United States. So I've had a lot of experience working with youth cycling, youth organizations in the past. It's wonderful because every now and then you'll get an email from somebody who says, you won't remember me, but 20 years ago, I did XYZ, you were there, thank you. And I'll tell you, that makes my day. And I know that our coaches hear that way more often than I do. And that's why we have such devoted and passionate volunteers. About 30% of our volunteers are not parents, do not have kids in the league. Many of them may have had kids at some point in the past, but they're, you know, everybody grows up, gets older, and moves on. But I can tell you that I have had many, many of our volunteers tell me, Steve, this is really important for me. I'm very passionate about this. I get a lot out of this as well. Don't forget that. You know, I'm here for the kids, but this is very meaningful for me as well. And so I think that's another thing that for NICA makes the community involvement, the organization, such a special place, and something that, you know, as people move on, one of the the most famous alumni we have, and I almost hesitate to bring this up because she is such a great individual, but former world champion, current World Cup mountain bike champion, Courtney, called me a couple of months ago. She sits on our advisory board. She does whatever she can to interact, especially with our student female athletes, and stay involved. She's only 25, but what an incredible athlete, what a mature person. And she called me one day asking for some advice. And I had to do this. I had to stop myself for a second and go, wait a second, the world champion's asking me for advice? And then I realized it had nothing to do with mountain biking. It's like, okay. So it's just, again, the point is that NICA, a lot of what's coming out of it, we're not going to see for years yet. Our first student athletes in the NorCal League started 20 years ago, but the national organization is only 11 years old now. So our oldest alumni are literally just turning 30. Think about that. The world is going to be a different place in 10 or 15 years when we have 100,000 NICA alumni leashed on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting thing to think about. It kind of actually leads me into my next question of, you mentioned Courtney, world champion. That is a phenomenal accolade for an organization's alumni. But, there's 22,000 kids in NICA. Yeah. So, I mean, what do you hope they get out of it? What's the experience that you hope that those tens of thousands of kids take away that aren't going to be a world champion?
And 99% of them are not even going to continue to race as they become adults. Mm-hmm. What I hope they take away is a lifelong love of the sport, a lifelong engagement in activity that's outside and active, whatever engagement, whatever sport they want to pursue, that those friendships that they've developed stay with them. I know for my own self, in sporting activities that I've been involved with, where you're very close with other individuals, those relationships have stayed with me for decades and are still very important to me. Some of my closest friends are people that I met through sport and when I was a teenager, and they're still my best friends. So that's one of the things, again, I hope that people realize that these relationships and these experiences that they're having as part of a NICA team within those NICA leagues will carry on. And even if you're away from somebody for 10 years, you go to school, you get a job, you get married, you have kids, whatever happens in your life, I hope that you continue to ride your bike. I hope you continue to go outside and be active. And I hope that you're willing to give back to your community and encourage younger people when you become my age and work to help them as well.
So how, I guess this is a nice way to wrap it up. That's what we hope happens. What do you say to a kid who wants to start this? How does somebody get involved in NICA? Say I'm 12 years old, I'm in middle school. What do I do?
Well, the first thing we do is we find if there's a team at your school. If there is, that's easy. We hook you up with that team, with that coach. You can come out and do a one-day tryout. You don't have to join right away. You can spend a couple of weeks going to practice, taking a look, making sure this is the right thing for you. If you need help, as we talked earlier, with a bike or with some funding, the leagues have scholarship programs, have loaner bikes. We do everything we can to make it open and inviting to any child that's interested. Of course, the parents have to have some say. When you're 12 years old, mom and dad are also going to have to be willing to be there and support you in this activity. But certainly our coaches are very, very good at speaking to parents, at speaking to caregivers, making sure they understand the risks. Because, of course, there are some. They're minimal. Mm-hmm. You're highly unlikely to have the kinds of injuries that you have in many other sports. And we do track that. We have a great safety and risk program. And we know where we sit compared to football, soccer, and other things. And we're better than all those in terms of our safety record. But the main thing, to answer your question, is that if the child shows some interest, then we want to engage them. We want to, especially if they don't have friends that are interested, make them feel comfortable and welcome. If there's a couple of them that want to join together, so much the better. If they have an older sibling that's already part of the league, it creates an easier introduction. The number one thing, though, with middle school especially, is all about fun. It's about getting out and having some adventures. It's having experiences. It's not about racing. We totally de-emphasize racing at the middle school level. It's more about getting on your bike and getting out there.
There it is. Well, this conversation has me all stoked to get out there and ride around as soon as we wrap up. So,
Cool.
yeah,
I hope you can.
yeah. Well, it's
And next time I'm in your neck of the woods, we'll go out together.
that's right. Next time you're in California, we'll go for a spin. That's what it's all about: connecting, having a good time together.
Exactly. And that's what transfers. That's what sticks with you through your life.
Indeed. Well, Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us and to just kind of fill us all in on NICA.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for asking, and thanks for your support.
Oh, of course. It's a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Take care now.
Bye.